Good morning. Today's lecture is brought to you by Dry Roasted Peanuts, Honey Roasted Style from Southern Grove. I'm just kidding. There's nothing brought to you by. There's no sponsorship. But good morning. We're getting into World War II today. Again, we're going to talk about the home front. So yesterday we ended off with the briefly talked about the Holocaust at the end there yesterday. This is an American history class, so this is something we won't necessarily dive into, but I just want to retouch it a little bit. The Holocaust, it is estimated 6 to 10 million people were killed. That they will find evidence as we start to liberate Europe. We're not quite there yet, but understand that this was not well known. The Holocaust, the events of the persecution of the Jews was known, but the extermination of the Jews was not really known the scale until the end, to the conclusion of the war. So it's hard to stop it. Like, why didn't we go in and stop it sooner and all this? We just really didn't know a lot about it. Anyway, that's just a little side note on the Holocaust there. That's kind of a sub note in there, but obviously if you take a lot more in-depth classes on that matter, you'll go into great detail on it. Okay, the home front. So mobilizing for war. By the end of World War II, some 50 million had registered for the draft and 10 million had been inducted into the military. As an interesting note, we had started the draft before the war. The draft had been reinstituted in 1940 as a peacetime buildup. Of note, some of you may or may not know this actor. I'm actually listening to an audiobook right now. Jimmy Stewart, the actor from, you probably know him, It's a Wonderful Life, the Christmas movie. He's also in the original movie, The Rear Window. Very famous Hollywood actor from the 30s, 40s, and 50s, and 60s. He was actually drafted, was a pilot, and actually flew combat missions in World War II. A very decorated combat aviator. He retired as a brigadier general from the Air Force when the Air Force was created. So just because you were a celebrity did not mean you were exempt from the draft. They tried to make him make war movies because they were fearful that he was a famous American, that if he fell into Germans' hands, they'd try to use it for propaganda and such. But he refused and wanted to fight. So that's literally a actor, Hollywood personality that he'd put on a uniform on screen. He actually was a hero in real life. Jimmy Stewart, I could go on hours about it, and it's pretty crazy about how he purposely went out of his way to get more dangerous missions and took risks that some celebrities would never even dream about. That being said, the draft is instituted, and he's one of those 10 million that will be drafted, and he was right before the war. In 1942, federal government ended voluntary enlistment to ensure the wartime sacrifice was widely shared throughout society. So they're not going to allow you to volunteer. They're going to draft. That way they have an even share across the board, because they can't take everybody, because they have to have some people to stay home and do home missions and home. They can't use all the males, because if we lose all the males at home, there's some things that would come to a halt. That's not knocking any women, but the reality is we can't take the best of everybody away, right? So the way to keep it fair across the board and to keep us from over-exerting our resources was the draft. Federal government role changed. Government expanded again. Unemployment fell to 2% during the war. That's crazy. We're at 4.5% right now. So we went from 25% on enrollment to now we have virtually everyone has a job because everyone's being used. Forced civilian industries to retool for war production. Gross national product rose from 91 billion to 214 billion, which is insane. Marketed billions of dollars worth of war bonds, increased taxes, and began practice of weekly income tax from the paycheck to pay for things. So our emergence of our modern economy are going to start to come out of this war. So business and war. Thousands of aircraft, 100,000 armored vehicles, and 2.5 million, trucks rolled off the American assembly lines. Government-sponsored scientific research, inventions like radar, jet engines. Jet engines will come in at the end of the war. We don't really use them in the war, but the jet technology is there. But the biggest invention is the atomic bomb. Atomic bomb is invented, created in the early 43, 44, with the testing in 45. So that's the biggest advancement in technology we really gain, is the atomic weapon at the end of the war. Federal funds are Federal funds rejuvenated established manufacturing areas and created entirely new industrial centers. Like the West Coast really rapidly expands. At this point, we talk about the Sun Belt being created. War is good for business, and the economy gets going. Now, here's a picture of a plant that would have been for other, I think it was for automobiles, had been created to make airplanes. It's a pretty awesome sight, isn't it? By the way, a lot of the workers at these plants was females. I had a great aunt that I don't think she worked on this particular bomber, but I had a great aunt that worked, I think, in Omaha or I think it was Omaha, and she worked on like B-17s or B-24s. This is something the Japanese and the Germans cannot replicate. Our plants are 24 hours around the clock. We're industrial might. We can outproduce anybody in the world, and that's what we do. And plus, by the way, are we getting bombed at all? No. We have no threat of aerial bombardment, so our plants can operate seamlessly without much interference. Home front 2. Labor. Union membership will allow to be through the war. It'll soar. No strike pledges came to an end in 1944. By 44, the war had obviously shifted a lot, and we'll get to that a little bit later. But there was a no strike pledge that really will start to fall apart by 1944. Disparity between wages frozen by government order and expanding corporate profits. Companies were getting rich. A lot of these people that worked at companies wanted their pay to increase because at some point a wage price control will come into effect, and the employees don't like that. So, labor is going to be, for the most part, early in the war on board to do anything, but towards the end of the war, when the war is going good, they want their fair share of the pie. Fighting for the 4 freedoms, as we alluded to at the beginning of this lecture. Other wars that deeply divided America, not World War II, had united us, mostly because we were attacked. Remembered as the Good War. Among the wars that helped to sell World War II was freedom. Freedom from want. So no return to the Depression era. So we talked about, I think it was the 4 freedoms were freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from want, freedom from fear, right? So the freedom from want had been a very big one because we just came out of the Great Depression, right? We don't want to return to these Depression ways where life sucked. America was basically brought to a halt. That being said, there is a 5th freedom that will be added. Freedom of choice. If I asked you in here what your guys' favorite beverage is, whether it be soda, hot drinks, whatever, you guys would all have a different opinion, right? Brock, what's your favorite pop if you were to drink pop?
Coke.
Zach?
Diet.
What?
Coke.
Diet Coke? Oh, aspartame. Dalton?
Squirt.
There's a squirt lover. Good job. Aiden?
Dr. Pepper.
Mine is Pepsi. But I do like when I go to Chipotle, get the glass bottle Coke. Oh, that's really, really good with my burrito bowl. The point of this is choice, right? As the war comes to a conclusion or towards the end, America is emerging from freedom of freedom of speech, freedom of worship. That's ingrained in us. Freedom from wants. We don't want to longer be in where we're barely getting by. We have freedom of freedom from fear. So we don't have fear in our lives. We can live a life without worrying about what's going to happen in our house and etc. But now, freedom of choice. I can choose what I want. I don't have to just go with the boring old Cola, Dr. Thunder, or Dr. Razzle. I think I saw that one at Aldi's. Dr. Razzle made me laugh. So freedom of choice. Now, as we get into the 50s, think about what happens in the 50s. You guys remember what happens in the 50s when we talked about it in your sophomore year? What happens in the 1950s America? So 1940s, we do World War II, we come out of the Depression, we rebuild our country, right? It's called the baby boom, and it's also called the affluent society. Is there a lot of stuff available in the 50s for us for cheap? Yeah, it is. People go to the movies, people buy cars, people buy houses. Did you ever go to your grandma's or your great-grandparents' house and see all the old appliances there? Guess where a lot of those products came from? 50s and 60s, right? That's born from this freedom of choice, right? Did they have to buy that? No. But did they want to buy it? You guys ever seen an old refrigerator? The old lead-lined refrigerators, like the one from Indiana Jones when he gets nuked and he rides it? Not real, by the way. But Pretty cool, isn't it? Those old devices lasted actually longer than modern. You know what's crazy is my grandparents built their house in '67. Those appliances in the house, I don't think they replaced but one of them until the late '90s. They were that putrid green that looked like puke everywhere, but that was the color of the late '60s, early '70s. They bought them, and literally, I think my grandpa passed away before we replaced the stove and the dishwasher, but the fridge had been replaced because the coolant went out in it. But like, they built stuff to last, and this was this whole consumer goods, right? Today now we have consumer goods everywhere that we can't get rid of, like fidget spinners. Sorry if I'm on the fidget spinner tangent again. I hate fidget spinners. Took a trip to Europe, just so you know. First thing that us Americans, the vendors, come up to try to sell us is not some cool European whatever. It's a fidget spinner. Oh, Americans, you want a fidget spinner? No, we don't. Now, women at work. Women went to work. Rosie the River images that you see up there open new fields. Though women will leave the work factories at the end of the war, that opens new opportunities. Vision of family-centered prosperity came home to many Americans. The idea that women could work some part-time jobs too, or secretary jobs to make more income, was opened. So if you didn't have kids or family, this is going to usher into the greatness of the 50s. Now the 50s is not perfect across the board because there's also racial tension, but far as a society as consumer economics, the 50s is great. And it's all built at the end of World War II. Now visions of post-war freedom toward an American century. Henry Luce's The American Century. United States' new role in the future as a dominant power was going to emerge after the war. That was becoming self-evident. Free economic enterprise, prosperity and values. America had money, we had resources. We were going to dominate the world. The Soviet Union knew this, the British knew this, and we knew this. The question is what the future would be exactly like, right? So America is now emerging as the most powerful country in the world. We had the tools to do a lot of things. What was it going to exactly look like? The way of life for a free man. Even as Congress moved to dismantle parts of the New Deal, liberal Democrats unveiled plans for a post-welfare state. So the New Deal had been in place, right? Now a lot of those programs are going to die off, right? Like the CCC, Civilian Conservation Corps, as the war dictates. Some of these things are going to be stripped back. A few things will endure. Social Security being the primary one that we think of that will endure on, right? But the government expanded. New jobs are created. The government doesn't really retract a lot after the World War II, the New Deal. A lot of those jobs will remain in place. So, National Resources Planning Board, NRPB, offered a blueprint of a welfare state. Economic Bill of Rights never passed by Congress. So these plans they want to go forward are going to kind of be stalemated. So there'll be some things that endure. Another one, FDIC, federal insurance for banks. If you go by a bank, you guys see the FDIC sign, right? But a lot of parts of the New Deal will actually be dismantled, right? Because were they actually truly effective? It's still, we debate about it a lot. Historians go back and forth. Now, 1944. Just because it's a war doesn't mean we don't have an election, right? Civil War. Lincoln had the same thing. Lincoln had to run against the former General McClellan in 1864. 1944, the war is going decently well. We just had Operation D-Day. But FDR, realizing that the war is going good, does not mean he's immune for re-election, right? No president's ever ran for a fourth term. So, he runs on the basis, don't change in the middle of the war, you know, like we're doing good, let's finish the fight. But FDR is old, right? People realize he might die, he might not die. And he'd been kind of taking the Democratic Party way left, right? Much more liberal thinking. They needed a moderate. They needed a middle ground candidate to go with FDR, right? Henry Wallace had been his vice president for, I think, I don't think it was all 3 terms prior, but been his vice president for a while, right? He dumps him. Why? Henry Wallace was way more left than FDR. Republicans had gained ground in midterm elections. So they pick a very conservative Democrat, a moderate, a supporter of the New Deal, but someone that had a common appeal to most Americans, and that was Truman, our good old Missourian Truman. Truman is selected based on his moderatism, that he is, yes, he is a loyal Democrat, but yet he's moderate, right? He's not over the top left. He can appeal to Republican voters. Missouri was, a critical state to win as far as the middle of the country. Just so you know, until the last, I think it was McCain won it and Obama won the election, for like 100 years, whoever won Missouri won the election. So it's kind of a crazy thing to think about. Now, Dalton, this is one you'll appreciate. Your dad appreciated it, and I appreciated it. And that is 1944, as they look for a post-welfare state or some things that they can include from the New Deal and move forward. What's going to happen in 1945-46 when the war ends? What's going to come home?
Soldiers.
Soldiers, right? Some of those soldiers will be still employed by the government, but thousands of them and several million will be what? Looking for a job. We didn't know exactly what the military was going to look like post-war because historically the United States had shrunk its military after every major war. After World War II, it'll be the exception, and now today we have a very big army, right? Military. But it starts from this. But as a counteraction to you have 5 million people come home. You have 2% unemployment. What's naturally going to happen to unemployment? Inflation's going to go up. You're going to have a lot of influx of people without a job. So they passed what's called the Servicemen's Readjustment Act, or the better known as the GI Bill. Did your dad use the GI Bill, Dalton? Do you plan to use something of the GI Bill if you enlist? Yeah. This is what better known. The GI Bill originally is what helped service members get their college paid for. Today it's a lot more complex, so there's like 3 or 4 different things that go with it. But the GI Bill is literally going to offer returning young soldiers, so 21 from 18 to 24 years old is going to be the primary age, young men, unmarried most of them. A lot of them actually get married and they come back for obvious reasons, and they pop out a kid within 9 months of returning. You do the math. War is stressful. Let's leave it at that. Instead of going straight to work, what are they going to do? They're going to go to college, a vo-tech school. They're going to get a craft. They're going to get a job. That's going to slow down. Not all of them are going to take this, right? But a lot of them are. So universities are going to expand. They're going to see a lot more men come to college all of a sudden. Vo-tech schools. Automotive, people that are getting electricians, specialized jobs, they're going to get paid, they're going to get the college paid for that they never had before, right? It's revolutionary. So, and not only do these people have skills from the military, because World War II, you learned a lot of skills. In the military, I've learned a lot of skills that I apply here as a teacher and at home, right? It's revolutionary. Now, does it keep us going from a recession after the war? No, but does it soften the blow? Oh, yes. And by the way, talking about the 1950s, when we have that great economic boom in the 50s, what is it created by? A lot of it's because of the GI Bill. Because by the 50s, people own their own businesses, and etc. How many of you here have seen Back to the Future, the original one? Has anyone not seen Back to the Future? We'll change that. But when he goes back to 1954, yes, or 1955, because the movie takes place in 85, right? Because he goes back 30 years. Remember, he goes back in time, right? 1955. He goes back to, what's the name of the town? Oh, it's, doesn't matter the name of the town, but his town in the movie, right? Goes back. What do you see? And you look at 1985, the town's kind of like dead, right? There's a lot of unemployment, bums on the street. But when he goes back to 1955, what's the town like? It's popping, right? You see someone pull up to the gas station. What instantly happens as soon as someone comes up to the gas station? Is the guy pumping his own gas, or what happens?
No, they have tellers, or don't they have like gas people?
Yeah, it's like 3 or 4 gas people. One comes up, hey, I got your gas. Someone else is washing the window. There's a lot of stuff going on. It's happening, right? There's jobs. There's a lot of small mom and pop shops. The restaurant was small. It was a local chain, right? It wasn't like McDonald's. It wasn't Village Inn or anything like that. It was a local establishment. So it all comes from this. Now, The Road to Serfdom. A surprise bestseller by Alfred Frederick A. Hayek claimed that even the best intended government efforts to direct the economy pose a threat to individual liberty. So not everyone's going to be on board with the government expanding its role in the economy and keeping it. Helped lay the foundation for modern conservatism, equated fascism, socialism, and the New Deal as economic planning with a loss of freedom. This is where the Republicans are going to gain ground in the 40s. They say, yeah, well, the government can help to some degree, but the government can't plan the entire economy. and you're going to see a retraction of the government from the economy to some degree to a good level. Does that make sense? So looking at this, the New Deal had been viewed even in the 40s as maybe a step too far. And now you're going to see a step backwards. Let business do their thing. And that's why the 50s is so successful, because when Eisenhower comes in, even Truman kind of stepped back a little bit. We're going to loosen the control of the economy and let people flourish. Does that make sense? The government's still going to be there, but it's not going to be as heavy as it had been. Okay, the American dilemma. The war against Nazi tyranny, its theory of a master race, discredited ethnic and racial inequality. What this means, as the war in Europe is going to come to an end and we understand what the Nazis have been doing, we've been teaching the 4 freedoms, now the 5th freedom. The reality is we're going to have to address the racial and ethnic problems at home. Now that doesn't mean we have to deal with them directly in 43, 44, 45, but that means within the coming years, they're going to be addressed because the African American group and other minorities are no longer going to sit on the sidelines saying we're going to take this. So pluralistic vision of American society now became rhetoric. Patriot assimilation created a vast new melting pot. Immigrants moved to new neighborhoods, mixing all sorts. By the war's end, racism and nativism have been stripped of intellectual respectability, at least outside of the South. Holocausts were too terrible to be believed. Still, hatred for Jews will endure in the United States, but it was just, once we learned of the Holocaust, we couldn't fathom it. Now, even in the North, there'll be struggle for equality, but what happens after the war's conclusion, for the most part, probably 70% of the country goes through a rapid expansion of rights and expansion of what I call getting along. Before the war, you guys, we watched Unbroken the year I had you, didn't we? Louis Zamperini, he's an Italian. Was he well liked initially? No, because his parents were Italian, right? They moved to the United States. He was an American, but he's a kid of an immigrant, right? Post-World War II, did that matter anymore? No, it didn't. You see the blending of society across the board. African Americans will still be behind on this, but you go to the cities, you go to the suburbs that will spawn up. Let's say Brock, Aiden, Zach, you move to a new suburb. You're all neighbors. Well, just for argument's sake, Zach, you're Italian, Brock, you're Scottish, Aiden, you're, we'll say Jew. Or Jewish. That being said, do you guys look at that now? You all 3 served in World War II. You were in the Navy, you were in the Army, you were in the Army. What are you going to sell? Instead of looking at racial stories, what are you going to talk about?
Military stuff.
Hey, I was here, right? What gets lost? Prejudice about race, right? Now, was it still going to be there in some cases? Yes, but a large scale, the society for as immigrants, we're going to forget that. There'll be other things that pop up, such as the fear of communism again, at the civil rights movement with African Americans, but it's changing. Okay. Now, one thing, Jews, you're still going to have a hard time, and is there still anti-Semitics out there, even in this country? The Bracero program agreed that Mexican American by 1942 take up jobs. This lasted in 1964. So you have a huge influx of Hispanics into the United States. This will spark a rise in ethnic marriages. So you have a lot of what we call mixed families at this point. That the Latino, right? You have a lot of Latinos that will intermarry, and you have a lot of people, especially in the Southwest, in Texas area, a lot in Texas, that have a mixed background. They're white and Hispanic, right? Which is awesome. It's a good mixed race. Now, the Zoot Suit riots. I think I talked about this in my. Actually, I'm kind of confused on what I've talked about because I just taught this to the sophomores the other day. The Zoot Suit riots are going to spark some tensions, though. Essentially, what happened was young Spanish American kids of these people that came in, they're going to wear these big baggy suits. We're talking about they look like they're oversized suits, but they also have a vest. So old 1930s, 40s suits were 3 pieces. You had a suit, a vest, and pants, and probably a hat like a fedora that you guys make fun of me when I wear mine. But men,
Nice clothes?
yeah, I mean, men would wear nice clothes. Men, like, if I was a teacher, I'd be wearing a three-piece suit probably on a daily basis, like Mr. Parsons does a lot. He wears a two-piece usually, but add the vest, right? During the war, clothing's rationed, so men would often go without a vest, because like they'd go or they'd donate some of their clothing to the supply, so they would have maybe a one or two-piece suit, right? Maybe a nice shirt, pants, maybe a jacket if it's good, maybe or maybe not a tie, depending on what they had donated or what they had available, right? The zoot suits of these were three-piece suits. They were baggy. A lot of people viewed them as excessive waste that they could go for the war effort. And then it helped that these teenagers were viewed as delinquents not going to school, causing trouble. And then they got in a fight with a bunch of Navy sailors. And so these zoot suit riots resulted in the zoot suits being basically banned in LA. So it's not all rosy. The American Dilemma 2. Indians during the war, 25,000 will serve in the war as code talkers. The Indians are drafted and do make up an important role. We can spend a lot of time talking about that. Asian Americans wartime, though we obviously put Japanese in internment camps, 50,000 or so will serve mostly in all Asian units, segregated. About 70% of the Japanese Americans in the continental United States lived in California at that point. Okay, so just because they go to the internment camp doesn't mean they can't serve. And they will have, and honestly, some of the Japanese Americans were some of the best soldiers because they wanted to prove themselves in combat and say we are loyal to America. Japanese American internment camps, I just mentioned that. Military persuaded FDR as an executive order 9066. Relocation of Japanese descent from the West Coast did not include Hawaii, but there was 10 camps. One was in Arkansas throughout the country where they relocated all Western Japanese descendants. No court hearings, no due process, no writs of habeas corpus. Denied the appeal of Japanese American Korematsu versus the United States. Basically said it was a military order during war, they could carry it out. One of the darker parts of World War II for the United States. Obviously, President Reagan apologized in, I think, 1988, 87, and they actually gave reparations to the families that they moved that were still alive. But it's a dark moment during the war. Okay, we've got 2 slides and we'll be done for today because I gotta go take care of something in a minute. Blacks in the war. Nazi Germany cited American practice as proof of its own racial policies. Blacks and whites' blood was separated. Today, obviously, we know a black and a white can give each other blood, right? Blood is blood. World War II, they didn't think it could mix, or they didn't want it to mix. You had black blood banks and white blood banks. Obviously, today there's some other things that keep you from giving blood, but like, really? But now, we always don't have that, but that's a problem. Second migration, moved industrial to the heartland. Massive migration out of the South again, African Americans looking for jobs. There'll be race riots in Detroit in 1943. Essentially, a bunch of teenagers argue at a park that result in a bunch of race riots in the heat of the summer of 43 in Detroit. So as these African Americans move, they're not always going to be welcomed even to the northern cities. And if when they go to the northern cities, they're not going to move into white neighborhoods. They're going to be basically segregated to their own subdivisions or divisions of the city. Think about Harlem, New York now. Is just another suburb of New York now. It's predominantly, it's a black neighborhood, right? Think of Harlem, that's what you think of. And that comes from the early 20s, and then in the 40s when they moved again, there's parts of the cities that will become predominantly African American. More than 1 million blacks will serve in the armed forces. Army restricted the number of enlistees. And Navy only accepted blacks as waiters and cooks. GI benefits will be limited to the African American group. This is also where you're going to get the birth of the civil rights movement, the time of change coming after the war. They basically put off any active marches or anything that they wanted for change until after the war, and that's the reason the 50s is such a huge moment in the civil rights movement. Okay. The double V, meaning the double victory. The Congress of Racial Equality Corps will be founded. Victory over Germany, Japan, and the end of segregation at home. So they're going to look at the war, winning the war, but then also victory at home. Black freedom meant end of lynching and an end of discrimination and getting jobs. So they felt as soon as the war ended, they needed changes for them. And that's why, like I said, we've alluded to this, is the coming of the civil rights movement. The war and race changes began to happen at the uproar of the South. A lot of people in the South do not like the changes, will not listen to the changes until court orders and things in the 50s and 60s force southern states, the old core of the Confederacy area, and make them conform. And even to this day, there's small pockets that try to resist even to this day, which is crazy. Account of Countries, Racial Past, Present, and Future, written by Swedish social scientist Gunnar Myrdal, That American Dilemma. Talked about basically this problem that we're talking about, our foundation, our freedom, but then also the African Americans and immigrants and the stuff that we had greatly struggled with. He concluded, there is bound to be a redefinition of the Negro status as a result of this war. And he was right. That's the Civil Rights Movement, the rise of Martin Luther King Jr., and the rest is what we'll get to in the coming weeks. So, American Dilemma, this gets us through right to the end of the war. Tomorrow I will conclude the war. I've got 1 page left of notes. We did a lot today. If you have questions, please let me know. Have a great day.